Have you ever been judged by your appearance before anyone even knew your name? Have you ever felt invisible? Like your very existence didn't matter to the people around you? Well, let me tell you about the day I walked into one of the most prestigious corporate buildings in the city, wearing clothes that hadn't been washed in days, with dirt under my fingernails and desperation written all over my face. I was just 12 years old and I had no idea that this single moment would change everything I thought I knew about humanity, about judgment, and about the thin line between compassion and cruelty. I remember standing outside those massive glass doors, watching my reflection in the pristine surface, seeing a version of myself I barely recognized anymore. My hair was tangled and matted. My jacket had holes in 3 different places and my shoes were held together with duct tape that had started to peel away from the worn leather. I looked exactly like what I was, a homeless child with nowhere else to turn. But what those people inside couldn't see was the story behind these ragged clothes, the pain behind these tired eyes, and the strength it took just to push through those doors and step into their world. The morning had started like any other morning in my new reality, which meant waking up cold, hungry, and uncertain about where my next meal would come from. I had been living on the streets for 3 weeks by then, ever since the night everything fell apart, the night my mother didn't come home from her double shift at the hospital, the night the police officers showed up at our tiny apartment with those devastating words that still echo in my mind every single day. "Your mother was involved in an accident. She didn't make it. I'm so sorry." Those 6 words shattered my entire world, and suddenly, I was alone in a way I never imagined possible. I didn't have grandparents who could take me in. My father had disappeared before I was even born, and my mother had been my entire universe, my only family, my everything. The social workers tried to help, they really did. But the system was overwhelmed, and I was terrified of being placed in a home with strangers, of losing the last threads of connection to my mother's memory. So I ran. I know it sounds stupid now. I know I should have stayed and let them help me, but grief does strange things to a 12-year-old mind, and all I could think about was staying free, staying in control of something, anything, in a life that had spiraled completely out of my control. Those 3 weeks on the streets taught me more about human nature than all my years in school ever had. I learned which shop owners would chase you away and which ones might leave out day-old bread in the alley. I learned how to make myself small and invisible, how to avoid the dangerous corners where older homeless people congregated, how to find places to sleep where I wouldn't be found or hurt. But most of all, I learned about the way people look at you, or rather, the way they look through you when you're dirty and poor and clearly don't belong in their clean, ordered world. I became a ghost, a shadow that people stepped around without acknowledging, without seeing as fully human. That particular morning I was hungrier than I had been in days. The shelter that usually left food out back had been closed for renovations, and I hadn't eaten anything substantial in almost 48 hours. My stomach felt like it was eating itself from the inside, and I was getting weak, dizzy, scared in a way that went beyond just physical hunger. I needed help, real help, and I needed it fast. That's when I remembered the business card my mother had kept pinned to our refrigerator for over 2 years, the one with the embossed logo and the name James Morrison, CEO, in elegant lettering across the center. My mother had met him once, years ago, when she had helped save his daughter's life in the emergency room where she worked as a nurse. He had given her his card and told her if she ever needed anything, anything at all, she should reach out to him. My mother, being the proud and independent woman she was, had never called, had never asked for help despite all the struggles we faced. But now she was gone, and I was desperate, and that card was the only lifeline I could think of. I had gone back to our apartment the week before, sneaking in through a broken window, and I had found the card still pinned to the fridge, a small piece of hope in the ruins of my old life. So there I was, standing outside the headquarters of Morrison Industries, clutching that business card in my trembling hand, trying to gather the courage to walk inside and ask for help from a man who probably didn't even remember my mother's face. The building itself was intimidating in a way I hadn't expected, all gleaming glass and polished steel, stretching up into the sky like a monument to success and wealth. People in expensive suits rushed past me on the sidewalk, their shoes clicking against the pavement with the confident rhythm of those who belonged, who knew exactly where they were going and why they mattered. I didn't look like them. I didn't smell like them. I definitely didn't belong in their world. But I was out of options, out of time, and out of strength to keep surviving on my own. I took a deep breath, whispered a prayer to my mother's memory, and pushed through those heavy glass doors into the marble lobby of Morrison Industries. The temperature change hit me first, going from the humid autumn air outside to the carefully climate-controlled interior, and then came the sensory overload of the lobby itself. Everything was pristine, perfect, from the gleaming marble floors that reflected the light from massive chandeliers overhead, to the modern art installations that probably cost more than my mother made in a year. The reception desk stretched across the far wall like a fortress, staffed by 3 women in matching navy suits with hair styled in perfect professional waves. Security guards stood at strategic points throughout the lobby, their expressions neutral but their eyes constantly scanning, constantly assessing threats. And I, in my stained clothes and broken shoes, was obviously a threat to the carefully maintained order of this place. I walked toward the reception desk, each step feeling heavier than the last, acutely aware of the dirt I was tracking across their perfect floors, of the way my appearance disrupted the aesthetic harmony of this corporate sanctuary. The receptionist closest to me looked up as I approached, and I watched her expression shift through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, distaste, and finally a practiced professional mask that couldn't quite hide the judgment in her eyes. Before I could even speak, before I could explain why I was there or show her the business card clutched in my sweaty palm, she held up one perfectly manicured hand and said in a voice that was polite on the surface but cold underneath, "I'm sorry, but I don't think you're in the right place. The nearest shelter is about 6 blocks east on Malcolm Street. They can help you there." I felt my face flush hot with shame and anger, the familiar combination of emotions that came with being dismissed before being heard, being judged before being known. "I'm not looking for a shelter," I managed to say, my voice coming out smaller and shakier than I wanted. "I need to see Mr. Morrison. I have his card. He told my mother if we ever needed help." The receptionist's expression didn't change, but I saw her exchange a glance with her colleague, a look that said everything without words. Another one. Another desperate person with a story trying to get to the CEO. "I'm sure Mr. Morrison is a very busy man," she said with practiced patience, as if explaining something obvious to a not very bright child. "He can't see everyone who walks in off the street. If you leave your information, someone from our community outreach department might contact you." But I knew what that meant. It meant no one would contact me. It meant my information would go into some file that would never be opened, would be forgotten the moment I walked out the door. I could feel panic rising in my chest, feel my last hope slipping away like water through my fingers. "Please," I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice and hating it but unable to stop it. "Please just call up to his office. Tell him Sarah Bennett's daughter needs to speak with him. Tell him the nurse who saved his daughter's life in the ER 2 years ago. Tell him it's an emergency." Something flickered in the receptionist's eyes at the mention of my mother's name, but it wasn't recognition or sympathy. It was something closer to irritation, as if I had crossed a line by bringing up a specific story, by making my plea more personal and harder to dismiss. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, I heard whispers starting around me. I turned slightly and realized that my presence had not gone unnoticed by the other people in the lobby, the employees arriving for work, the clients waiting for meetings, the delivery people moving through with packages. They were staring at me, some openly, some trying to be subtle about it, but all of them seeing the same thing: a dirty, desperate child who clearly didn't belong in this pristine corporate environment. "Look at that poor kid," someone whispered, not quite quietly enough. "What is she doing here? Think she's lost?" Another voice murmured. "Someone should call social services," came from my left. "She looks like she's been living on the streets." God, the smell. That one was barely a whisper, but I heard it, felt it like a physical blow. I wanted to disappear, wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow me whole, wanted to be anywhere but here, being examined and judged and found wanting by all these strangers who knew nothing about me, about what I had lost, about what I was trying to survive. The security guard was approaching now. I could see him in my peripheral vision, moving toward me with that distinctive walk that security people have, purposeful, but not quite threatening yet, ready to escalate if needed. "Miss," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone whose job was to remove people like me from places like this, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is private property, and you don't have authorization to be here." I felt tears burning behind my eyes, hot and humiliating because I had promised myself I wouldn't cry, wouldn't show weakness, wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. But I was 12 years old. I was orphaned, I was homeless, I was hungry, and I was so tired of being strong all the time. The business card in my hand was crumpled now from how tightly I had been gripping it, the embossed letters barely visible through the creases and smudges. This was my last chance, my only hope, and it was slipping away just like everything else in my life had slipped away. I opened my mouth to make one final plea, to beg them to just make one phone call, to give me just one chance, but the words stuck in my throat because I knew it wouldn't matter, knew that nothing I said would change their minds, or make them see me as anything other than a problem to be removed. The security guard's hand was reaching for my arm now, not rough but firm, the touch of someone who had done this many times before, removed unwanted people from spaces they didn't belong. I was about to let him lead me away, about to accept defeat and figure out what to do next, where to go when you've run out of places, when you've exhausted your last hope. Have you ever experienced that moment when you think everything is lost, when you've accepted that this is it, this is how your story ends, and then suddenly, the universe shifts, and everything changes in an instant? That's what happened next, and I still don't know if I believe in fate or destiny or divine intervention, but something happened in that moment that I can't explain as mere coincidence. The elevator doors on the far side of the lobby opened with a soft chime, and a man stepped out, talking on his phone, nodding at something the person on the other end was saying. He was in his 50s, I guessed, with gray hair at his temples and wearing an expensive suit that fit him perfectly, the kind of suit that announced success without being showy about it. He was clearly someone important. People in the lobby straightened up as he passed, nodded respectfully, stepped aside to give him space. This had to be an executive, maybe even someone from the C-suite, and for a split second I thought about calling out to him, about making one last desperate attempt to be heard by someone, anyone who might have the authority to help me. But before I could make a sound, before I could even fully form the thought, the man looked up from his phone and his eyes landed on me, and I watched something extraordinary happen on his face. His expression went from distracted executive to shocked recognition in less than a second, his eyes widening, his mouth opening slightly, his entire body language changing from purposeful stride to frozen surprise. He stopped walking so abruptly that the person behind him nearly collided with his back. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we just stared at each other across that marble lobby, this successful CEO in his perfect suit, and this broken child in her ragged clothes, and something passed between us that I couldn't name, but could absolutely feel. Then he was moving, not walking but almost running across the lobby floor, his expensive shoes making sharp sounds against the marble, his phone forgotten in his hand, his attention focused entirely on me with an intensity that was almost frightening. Everyone in the lobby turned to watch, the whispers growing louder, confusion spreading like ripples in water. Why was the CEO running through the lobby? Why was he heading straight for the homeless child the security guard was trying to remove? What was happening? The security guard's hand dropped from my arm as his boss approached, uncertainty written all over his face, clearly not understanding what was happening but knowing enough to step back when the CEO was involved. The receptionists stood up from their desk, craning their necks to see what was going on, their professional masks slipping to show genuine surprise. And I just stood there, clutching my crumpled business card, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest, not understanding what was happening but feeling that everything was about to change. The man, James Morrison, I realized, the CEO himself, stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the emotion in his eyes, something that looked like recognition mixed with concern, mixed with something I couldn't quite identify. He knelt down slowly, bringing himself to my eye level despite the expensive suit, despite the audience, despite everything. His voice when he spoke was soft, gentle, full of something that sounded almost like pain. "You're Sarah's daughter," he said, and it wasn't a question. "You have her eyes. Exactly her eyes." I couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but nod as tears finally spilled down my cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the dirt on my face. He reached out slowly, carefully as if afraid I might bolt, and his hand touched my shoulder with a gentleness that broke something inside me, some wall I had built to keep myself together, to keep myself surviving. "Where is your mother?" he asked, his voice still soft but urgent now. "Sarah, where is she? Why are you here alone? Why do you look like this?" What happened? The words came tumbling out then, all the pain and loss and terror I had been holding inside for 3 weeks pouring out in great gasping sobs that shook my entire body. She's dead, I choked out. Car accident. 3 weeks ago. I've been alone. I didn't know where to go. I found your card. She saved your daughter. You said if we ever needed anything. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for coming here like this. I didn't know what else to do. I watched his face crumble, watched grief and shock and horror pass over his features as he processed what I was telling him. Oh God, he whispered. Oh Sarah, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. Then he did something that surprised everyone in that lobby, including me. He pulled me into a hug, this powerful CEO in his expensive suit, holding this dirty, smelly, desperate child like she mattered, like she was worth something, like her pain was real and valid and deserving of comfort. I collapsed into that embrace, finally letting myself be a child again after 3 weeks of trying to be strong, trying to survive, trying to be an adult when I was anything but. I cried into his shoulder, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep inside, from the place where I had been storing all my grief and fear and loneliness. And he held me through it, this stranger who wasn't quite a stranger, this man who had known my mother briefly but who understood enough to know what this moment meant. When I finally calmed enough to breathe normally again, he pulled back slightly, keeping his hands on my shoulders, his eyes searching my face with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. You're coming with me, he said firmly. Right now. We're going to get you cleaned up, get you fed, get you somewhere safe, and then we're going to figure out exactly what happened and what you need. You should have come here sooner. You should never have been alone like this. Sarah saved my daughter's life. The least I can do is make sure her daughter is taken care of. He stood up then, turning to face the assembled audience in the lobby, all the people who had been whispering and judging and dismissing me just moments before. His voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed, but there was an edge to it that made everyone in that lobby stand a little straighter, pay a little more attention. This is Sarah Bennett's daughter, he said, his voice clear and strong, carrying to every corner of that marble lobby. Some of you might remember Sarah. She was the ER nurse who saved my daughter Emma's life 2 years ago when she was brought in after that car accident. She worked tirelessly for 18 hours to keep my little girl alive, refused to give up even when other doctors thought it was hopeless. She gave me back my daughter, gave my family back our hope and our future. And now she's gone, killed in an accident 3 weeks ago, leaving her daughter alone in the world. This child has been living on the streets, surviving on her own, because she had nowhere else to turn. And she came here today, to this building, looking for help, showing more courage than most adults I know. He paused, letting his words sink in, letting the guilt and shame settle over the people who had judged me, who had wanted me removed, who had seen me as a problem rather than a person. And what did she find when she came here seeking help? He continued, his voice harder now. Judgment, dismissal, security ready to remove her from the building, whispers about how she looked, how she smelled, how she didn't belong. You all saw a dirty child and decided she wasn't worth your time, wasn't worth your compassion, wasn't worth the basic human decency of listening to her story before deciding who she was and what she deserved. The lobby was silent now, the kind of silence that comes with collective shame, with the realization that everyone there had failed some fundamental test of humanity. I could see people looking away, unable to meet James Morrison's eyes, unable to face what his words were reflecting back at them. I want everyone here to remember this moment, he said, his voice softening slightly but losing none of its impact. Remember that every person who walks through these doors has a story. Every person struggling, every person who looks like they don't belong, every person society has taught you to look past or look down on, they're all someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend. They all matter. They all deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be treated with dignity and respect. Sarah Bennett understood that. She lived that every day of her life, treating every patient who came through those ER doors like they mattered, regardless of who they were or what they looked like. She saved my daughter not because we were wealthy or important, but because that's who she was, someone who saw the value in every human life. And her daughter, standing here right now, she has that same value, that same worth, regardless of what she's wearing or where she's been sleeping. He turned back to me then, his expression softening, becoming gentle again. Come on, sweetheart, he said, holding out his hand. Let's get you out of here. You're safe now. I'm going to take care of you. I promise. I took his hand, feeling the strength and warmth in his grip, feeling something I hadn't felt in 3 weeks. Hope. As we walked toward the elevators, past all those staring faces, past the receptionists who had dismissed me, past the security guard who had been ready to remove me, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't a problem to be solved or a nuisance to be removed. I was seen. I was valued. I was going to be okay. The elevator doors closed behind us, shutting out the lobby and all those judging eyes, and James Morrison squeezed my hand gently. "We're going to figure this out," he said quietly. "All of it. Where you're going to live, how to honor your mother's memory, how to make sure you never feel that alone or that scared again. Sarah gave me back my daughter. The least I can do is make sure her daughter has a future, has opportunities, has someone who sees her potential and her worth. You're not alone anymore. Do you understand? You're not alone." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat, unable to process the enormity of what had just happened, how close I had come to being turned away, how my entire life had changed in the span of minutes. The elevator rose smoothly toward the executive floors, carrying me away from that moment of desperation and judgment, carrying me toward something new, something I couldn't yet define but could feel approaching. Looking back now, years later, I can see that moment in the lobby as the turning point, the moment when everything could have gone differently but didn't. If James Morrison had left the building 5 minutes earlier, if he had been in a meeting, if he hadn't looked up from his phone at exactly that moment, my life would have taken a completely different path. But he did look up. He did see me. He did remember my mother and the debt he felt he owed her. And that made all the difference. What happened in the weeks and months after that day in the lobby changed my life in ways I could never have imagined. James and his wife Rachel became my legal guardians through a process that they made as smooth and quick as possible. They didn't do it out of obligation or charity. They did it because they genuinely cared, because they had loved my mother's compassion and dedication, and because they saw in me someone worth saving, worth investing in, worth loving. They gave me a home in their beautiful house in the suburbs, a room that was bigger than the entire apartment I had shared with my mother, filled with books and art supplies and everything a child could want. But more than the material things, they gave me stability, safety, and the space to grieve properly, to process my mother's death with the help of a therapist who understood trauma and loss. Emma, their daughter whom my mother had saved, became like a sister to me. She was a few years younger, but she had this incredible spirit, this joy for life that came from having faced death and survived. She told me once that she felt like she had been given a second chance, and that knowing my mother was the reason she was alive made her want to live in a way that honored that gift. We would stay up late talking about my mother, and I would tell her stories about the woman who had saved her life, about her strength and her kindness, and her unwavering belief that every person deserved compassion and care. James made sure I had everything I needed to thrive, not just survive. He enrolled me in an excellent private school, where I could catch up on the education I had missed during those weeks on the streets. He made sure I had access to every opportunity, every chance to discover what I loved and what I was good at. But more importantly, he taught me lessons about humanity, about seeing people for who they really are, rather than what they appear to be on the surface. He would tell me about that day in the lobby, about how ashamed he was that his own employees had treated me that way, had judged me so harshly without knowing my story. He used that moment as a catalyst for change in his company, implementing new training about compassion and human dignity, about recognizing that every person who walks through those doors matters. He started programs to help homeless youth, to support families in crisis, to honor my mother's legacy of caring for those who were most vulnerable. He would take me with him sometimes to speak at company meetings or charity events, and he would tell the story of the day I walked into that lobby, dirty and desperate and afraid. He would tell them how close he came to never seeing me, to missing that moment when he could make a difference in someone's life, and he would challenge them to be more aware, more compassionate, more willing to look past appearances and see the human being underneath. I learned so much from him about leadership, about using power and privilege for good, about recognizing the responsibility that comes with success. But I also learned about forgiveness, about understanding that people's initial reactions don't always reflect who they really are. That judgment often comes from fear or discomfort rather than cruelty. The receptionist who had dismissed me that day apologized later, with genuine remorse, explaining that they had been following protocols, that they dealt with so many people trying to get to the CEO with stories that they had become cynical, protective. It didn't excuse what they did, but it helped me understand it, helped me see them as humans who made a mistake rather than villains in my story. As I grew older, as I healed from the trauma of those weeks on the streets and the loss of my mother, I began to understand the deeper lessons of that experience. I learned that appearance means nothing about a person's worth, that judgment is easy, but compassion requires courage, that the difference between being seen and being invisible can change a life in an instant. I learned that my mother's legacy wasn't just in the lives she saved as a nurse, but in the way she taught people through her example to treat every person with dignity and respect. Now, as an adult, I work in social services, specifically with homeless youth, helping kids who find themselves in situations similar to what I experienced. I know what it feels like to be invisible, to be judged, to be dismissed before anyone knows your story. And I make sure that every young person who comes through our doors is seen, is heard, is treated like they matter, because they do. Every single one of them matters. I often think about the people in that lobby who whispered and judged, who saw a dirty child and decided she wasn't worth their attention or their compassion. I wonder if they remember that day, if it changed how they see people, if it made them more likely to look past appearances and see the human being underneath. I hope it did. I hope that moment of shame and reflection led to growth, to change, to a more compassionate way of moving through the world. James Morrison is still a huge part of my life. He and Rachel became the parents I needed when I lost the one I had. They didn't try to replace my mother. They honored her memory while giving me the love and support I needed to build a new life. Emma is my sister in every way that matters, and her children call me aunt. And we have built a family that is defined not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the connections that matter most. And sometimes when I'm having a hard day, when the work I do feels overwhelming, when I meet another child who has been through too much, who carries pain that no young person should have to carry, I think back to that moment in the lobby. I remember how close I came to being turned away, how different my life could have been if James hadn't looked up from his phone at exactly that moment. And I recommit myself to being the person who looks up, who sees, who recognizes that every person struggling deserves compassion and help, and the chance to be more than their worst moment or their hardest circumstances. If you're watching this, and you've ever judged someone based on their appearance, I want you to know that I understand. We all do it. We're all taught by society to make quick assessments, to categorize people, to decide who belongs and who doesn't based on superficial factors. But I also want to challenge you to do better, to look deeper, to ask yourself what story might be behind the appearance you're judging. That homeless person on the corner, that struggling parent in the grocery store, that student who always looks disheveled and tired, they all have stories. They all have pain and struggles and circumstances that you can't see from the outside, and they all deserve to be treated with basic human dignity and respect. Have you ever been in a situation where you judged someone too quickly, where you made assumptions that turned out to be wrong? Or maybe you've been on the receiving end of that judgment like I was? I want to hear your stories. Comment below and tell me about a time when appearances were deceiving, when you learned not to judge a book by its cover, when someone surprised you by being so much more than what you initially thought. These conversations matter because they remind us of our shared humanity, of the fact that we're all struggling in our own ways, all deserving of compassion and understanding. And if this story touched your heart, if it made you think differently about how you see and treat people, please leave a like. It helps other people find this story, helps spread this message of compassion and understanding that I think the world needs more of right now. Subscribe to Through My Eyes for more stories like this, real experiences that teach us about empathy, about humanity, about the moments that change our lives and shape who we become. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story, because every week I share experiences that matter, that make you think, that challenge you to be better and do better in this world. Remember, every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind. Be compassionate. Be the person who sees others, really sees them, beyond the surface, beyond the appearance, beyond the snap judgments. Be the person who makes a difference in someone's life, even if it's just by treating them with dignity and respect. That's what my mother taught me, that's what James Morrison showed me, and that's what I hope to pass on to you. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for being part of this community that believes in the power of stories to change hearts and minds. You matter. Your compassion matters. Your choices matter. Never forget that.